This is Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi from Respectability in Washington, D.C. Today I want to thank our host for letting us use the conference room here, and I want to especially thank Donna Meltzer and the DD Councils for being such an important partner for us in some of our work to reach out on employment issues, along with some of our partners from around the room. We have people here from Best Buddies, from Easter Seals, from Goodwill, from the ARC and other organizations, National Federation of the Blind, because we all share a vested interest in successful employment outcomes for people with disabilities. I want to encourage everybody who's following us electronically to be sure that you have the PowerPoints for this presentation. If you go to the Respectability website, which is www.respectabilityusa.org, go to the events page and you will see Erin Riehl's PowerPoint. Again, that's www.respectabilityusa.org. Go to the events page and you will find the PowerPoint so that you can follow along for this presentation. We're going to have some Q&A at the end of this, so the people who are live in the room with us will be able to ask questions. But we really do have a formal presentation that is geared very much for policymakers. And this is very important for policymakers because right now there's great excitement about the issue of employing people with disabilities. I want to thank especially Governor Jack Markell of Delaware for his work when he was chair of the National Governors Association in looking at what was called a better bottom line. Respectability has been thrilled with our partner organizations to meet with 32 different governors already about the exciting trends and opportunities in terms of employment for people with disabilities. In each of those 32 meetings, one of the highlights was the pride and pleasure we had in talking about what we're going to hear about today, and that is Project Search. This is one of the great leaders in social leadership, in nonprofit leadership, and that is Erin Riehle, who herself is a registered nurse who ran an emergency room. She also has a Master's of Business Administration, so she has the feel-good, warm public service hat, and she has the hard numbers hat of an MBA. She has done something that is really unprecedented in building a national model. It's really something that can be franchised around the country if you work in partnership with her. And this is something that can help young people with disabilities go directly into the workforce. That has three successful outcomes. Number one, of course, is the opportunity for these individuals to achieve the American dream. But equally important is what they can do for their employers, because they are successful employees who are doing a great job. They are reliable, responsible, talented workers who are bringing real assets to their employers. So it's great for the economy. The third, of course, is for the taxpayers, because these are young individuals who in most cases would ordinarily go into collecting benefits. If you can take them when they're 19, 20, and 21 years old and tee them up for a lifetime of independence, you can potentially save very big dollars for taxpayers. So this is a triple threat of success. A win-win for three different categories. Again, the individuals who have the opportunity to achieve the American dream. Secondly, the business community and the community that looks for talented workers. And third, the taxpayers who are looking for value in the investments they make in what we are doing here in this country. Erin, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I want to remind everybody who is following us to go to the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint, again, is at respectabilityusa.org on the events page. Please do follow along. Erin, thank you very much for coming in from Ohio to be with us specially today.
Thank you, Jennifer, Respectability Committee on Developmental Disabilities, and UCC for hosting me today. I'm delighted to be here to talk about Project Search. What I'm going to do real quickly is go through my slides, kind of tell you our story, but really talk about why, as a business, this has been a critical way for us to connect to both the people we serve and the people we hire. So Project Search started 16 years ago, and we are essentially a business-led model of training and employing people with disabilities. We recognized that we were serving many people with disabilities. We recognized that we had open positions. We recognized that we were a huge voice in the community, and yet we never had really had a program for people with disabilities, especially one that trained them to do the jobs that we actually needed or to fill the open positions that we had. And so 15 years ago, we created a business-led program called Project Search, and it's based on this quote by Stephen Simon. And he basically said, it's true, people with disabilities have the right to choose a path toward education and employment. However, while freedom of choice is a given, the right to work, no matter who you are, is earned. And earning the right to work is dependent upon the student's preparation. What we were experiencing is lots of people with disabilities who were coming to us and wanting to be employed, but they lacked the skills necessary to fill our positions. And in the United States, there really aren't lots of programs that train our young people in skills needed by our businesses. So we created Project Search as a skill-building program so that we could employ people with disabilities. It's really interesting, and I'm going to talk about this slide just a minute here. It basically talks about how we are funded, how we set up our model based on funding. And I think probably everyone listening and everybody in the room is slightly familiar. But essentially, if you are a person with a disability in the United States, there are 3 things that you are entitled to if you meet eligibility. So if I'm a young person with a disability, and I go through education, and I have an IEP, I'm entitled to stay in school from 18 to 21 and go through a transition program. And that transition program has as one of its goals indicators 13 and 14, which say that transition is going to focus on getting me a job, on employment. Now what we know, so there's a fair amount of money that's coming through Department of Ed focusing on transition. And yet we know that most people with disabilities who leave high school leave without employment. So there's funding there. If a person with a disability leaves education without a job, then they go to Voc Rehab. Voc Rehab is funded specifically to help gain employment. And yet the number of people who go through Voc Rehab and leave without a job is much higher than those who get a job by going through Voc Rehab. They're all doing great work, but we're not getting great outcomes. If a person goes through both of those, kind of the next stop is DD, developmental disabilities. And that's where you'll see a person put for the rest of their life in a workshop, in a day program, in an enclave, at incredible cost to our cities, our states, our government. And it's especially worrisome when you know that these people are incredibly capable of doing complex work. The training just wasn't there to move them into that work. So we have lots of people sitting out here at great cost. What Project Search did, all we did, we said, okay, there are these 3 separate funders. They exist in almost every city in America. Instead of each of them doing their things serially, following each other only after the other one has failed, in essence, what would happen if we asked the 3 of them to partner with us in 1 year, and we call that program Project Search. So we're going to ask education, just as they would if the young person was in a class, we're going to ask them to give us the same teacher and to pay for the teacher because that's what they pay for. We're going to ask Voc Rehab, just as they would if this person were trying to find a job, to pay for job coaching. We're going to ask Developmental Disability Services, just as they would if this person were in the community, to pay for follow-along services once the person is employed. So we asked all 3 of them to braid their funding in 1 year, and during that year, we're going to take a class of 10 to 12 young people, and we're going to move it into a business so that for their entire year, they're learning work skills while they're still in high school. Does that make sense? So, but here's the other tricky part of that. If you're a funder, if you're looking at policies, it's easy to say, well, let's ask these 3 entities to work together. let's ask education, voc rehab, and developmental disability groups to work together on this project. The problem is, in our government right now, they all have three vastly different definitions of employment. So you're asking these groups to work together, and they don't even agree on what employment means and what they will fund. That's a huge problem. And I'll give you a concrete example. Under IDEA and education, and again I talked about indicators 13 and 14, which specifically focus on employment. Employment is defined under education as being a homemaker, joining the military, taking an additional class or going on to any kind of further education, going into a workshop, an enclave, or last but not least, getting a competitive job. So I'll just give you an example. We could take 12 kids or 10 kids into Project Search and work a whole year on training them. And at the end of the year, if those 10 people went on to take one class or went into a workshop, the school would still get an A+ or 100%. Does that make sense? Because employment is defined so broadly. Then you move over to voc rehab, our second funder. They define employment in one way, and it's competitive employment only. So again, we're asking these partners to work together. And so if the school is sending a teacher and has 10 young people, VR is sending the job coaching for those 10 people, and yet only 5 of those young people get a job, and the other 5 go on to a program or take some classes, the school will again get a passing grade. Voc rehab will only be 50% successful, which is in no way passing. So, and then you have developmental disability. This is changing probably most of all, but it typically has been competitive employment, day program, enclaves, or workshops. So developmental disabilities definition has been much more aligned with education. In Project Search, we basically said, listen, we got to be on the same page. Resources are too finite. We can't afford to waste money. We want all of you to partner together and to fund this initiative, braid your funding so that it costs each of you less, but we get better outcomes. And so that's what we did. The school provides the teacher. VR provides the job coaches or funds the job coaches. DD funds the follow along. So what's our program? This is not rocket science. I'm always surprised about it. It's really nothing more than a business model applied to social service. It's kind of the way we would do it. So we basically say to a school, instead of keeping these young people here for one more year and working on math and reading, which may not change that much at 20 or 21, why don't we take them up out of that school and put them in a business for an entire year. During that year that they come inside the business, they never step foot inside their school. Because not only are we teaching them skills, but we're transitioning them to adulthood. We're teaching them how to behave as an adult. We're teaching them socially appropriate skills. So for the entire year, they have to go from home to the business, business home. So for example, if we have a young person who still wants to go to assemblies or pep rallies, they're probably not ready for Project Search. And we have a very rigid rubric by which we accept people. Because quite frankly, we're about finance. We're about bottom line. And if we take 10 kids, 10 young people in our class, and at the outset, we know that one of them has said, well, we don't really know if we want a job, but we'd like to hang out at the hospital, then we're not going to take that person in our program because resources are too important, and we have to take the people who want to work. So we have a very strict criteria for application. So for this 9 months, they come from home, they come to the business every day for 9 months. And during that 9 months, they have to dress like the people in that business. They have to follow the rules of the people in that business, the dress code, the absenteeism policy, you name it. I'll just give you a really good example. We had a program that was actually located on a college campus, And they asked us to partner with them. And the young person who was in our program kept being late over and over and over again. And so we decided to exit the student. Because our theory is we are quick to enroll, we are quick to exit. And we're a tough program. We don't play around. The school district came to us and said, well, we allow them to be late up to 60 times a year. And so how can you kick them out of your program? And it was a perfect opportunity for us to say, are you serious? There's not a business in America that can tolerate a good employee being late or tardy 60 times. And so it's a great example of that mismatch sometimes between social service policies and business policies. We're tough. We play like a business. We take 10 to 12 young adults with a variety of intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's our niche. Most of our people are DD eligible. It's what we believe in and what we're good at. The reason we take 10 to 12, none of our numbers are magical. All of our numbers relate to funding. If you know about education, you know that every city, every state gets a certain amount of money per pupil. It's called per pupil funding or FTE funding. And if we're going to ask a school to move a teacher into a business for an entire year, they have to be able to afford the teacher. So we're going to multiply the number of students times the per pupil funding, and that tells us how many students we have to have. Does that make sense?
Can you speak even more loudly?
I can. So we have an instructor who comes from the school. We have job coaches who work for a community rehab provider such as Easter Seals, such as Goodwill, a wide variety. And that funding comes to them from Growth Rehab. Our folks are immersed in the host business culture. So it is an inclusive setting, and our young people are going to go out and learn skills in a totally inclusive environment. They're going to rotate through 3 unpaid internships that last approximately 10 to 12 weeks long. And when they're in those internships, they're going to learn skills that will allow them to go out and be employed. I get questions all the time about why we don't pay them. We don't pay them because they're high school students who have absolutely no skills. They are getting an hour and a half of curriculum every single day. We ask our businesses to provide a classroom. They have a teacher and 2 additional staff usually on site. They're never working for the business. They're there for their benefit, not the benefit of the business. The business allows us to come in. We actually believe that paying for a learning opportunity just because they have happen to be a person with a disability is actually fairly patronizing, because it doesn't happen to anyone else in the world. And to say that it must happen because of disability is quite frankly a turnoff to businesses over time. So these are unpaid internships. The outcome is employment in the community, not at the host site necessarily. Although we expect our host site to have a willingness to hire good candidates if there are open positions. I'll give you one really good example. We had a young woman in Cincinnati who wanted to work at the Hallmark store down the street in her neighborhood. She'd applied there ever since she was 16. They never even gave her the courtesy of an interview because she had a disability. So she came into our program at the hospital. We're not a Hallmark store, but big businesses tend to be a microcosm of the working world, and we can train in many, many things. And so her first rotation, we put her in our storeroom, and she learned, how do you open a crate? How do you take the boxes out? What do you do with them? How do you put them on a shelf? How do you know where they go? Her second rotation, she worked at our pharmacy. How do you front shelves? How do you check expiration dates? How do you dust the shelves to make sure that they're okay? Her third rotation, she was in our gift shop, and she learned how to do a seasonal display. She continued with stocking. Today she works at the Hallmark store. In her neighborhood, she's worked there full-time for 6 years. The reason that happened is because prior to Project Search, when she'd applied, she had absolutely no experience in any of the things that they needed. She also didn't have any letters of recommendation. And when you come out of a Project Search program, you have a letter or 3 letters from a business saying you were here and you were learning things. So that part is critical. Our folks have to be 18 to 21 years old, their last year of school eligibility, or they have to be a DD eligible adult. They have to have appropriate hygiene, social, and communication skills. This is really important. This isn't a take-all program. We cannot possibly do that. So if we have a young person who has hygiene problems, they're not going to be at Children's Hospital if they have body odor. It's not possible. Now, we might work with them the first couple of weeks. But if that continues, they need to be in a program at a site where that's not an issue. So this is not an all-takers program. When I talk about communication skills, what I really mean is that they have to make themselves understood, whether that's an interpreter, an alphabet board, an iPad, we don't care, but they have to have some way of making themselves understood. They have to have the ability to take direction and change behavior. This is critical. And I'm not talking major things here. I'm talking that if I say no or stop, they have to understand that. And I'll give you a really good example. We had a young man in our program who had autism, pretty severe autism, and we were walking down the main hall of our hospital. He loved medical dramas, and at the top of his lungs, he yelled, "Code Blue." Well, it was kind of funny at the time because I knew he didn't mean it. But you know what? None of the doctors or nurses or parents or patients knew he didn't mean it. And so that's not going to work for our setting. So we moved him instead to our program in a bank where Code Blue means nothing. And then if he needs to say it, he can. So it's not about extinguishing behaviors, but it's about finding the business where the behavior fits, not about forcing it into a business where it's not a good fit. They have to access public transportation. This is a huge part of our program. It's the one about which we quite honestly get the most pushback. But we require anyone who comes into our program to spend the summer before or part of the year as necessary learning to get to our site independently. We don't care if they're still eligible for the school bus because this is their last year of transition. And we really believe that if we don't teach them about transportation, we're missing a monumental opportunity and they're just going to know how to sit at home. So we force it. They must get there. We don't care if they pay for a taxi, if their parents bring them, if they take paratransit. We don't care about any of those things, but they have to learn to get there independently. The cool thing about that, and our schools like it, because then that saves a fair amount of transportation dollars. But we don't do it for that. We do it because it's better for our young people. They have to pass a drug screen and a background check. Most of all, they have to want to work. And again, we take folks who want to work. Resources are finite, and we're very clear about serving people who are going to come out of it, go to work, and live as independent a life as possible. This is our definition of a successful outcome. It's competitive employment in an integrated setting. Year-round work, 16 hours a week or more, minimum wage or higher. And that's the only thing we count as success in Project Search. We have 273 programs in 44 states. We serve about 2,500 young people a year. Of those 2,500 people we serve each year, we have a 68% employment rate this year. I actually think it's going to go up next year. I think the economy has changed a bit. 50% of our programs remain in healthcare. The other 40 are in a really broad mix of business types. I think it's important to know from a financial point of view that across the country, 88% of our graduates who are placed, so 88% of the 68% are benefit eligible, which means they're working enough hours in a business to be eligible for business benefits for health care. Now, what
Saves the government quite a lot, right?
Well, so what it means, so 88% are eligible. Now, in truth, 35% will usually take those benefits initially. Where we see change is usually if we can keep a person with a disability employed 5 years or more, that changes at about the 5-year mark. And we see people who will come off public benefits and go to the business benefits because they believe it's safe. And to answer your question, Jennifer, if this is a rough estimate, it's probably low, but benefits, government benefits alone, can cost upwards of $1 million per person over their lifetime. And so every time we can get somebody off of those and onto business benefits, it's a huge savings. The other thing we're doing that's just critically important is that working with our young people, quite frankly, isn't enough. They may want to work, but many of our young people, or some of them, come from families in which it would be easier if the young person continued to sit at home and collect benefits. And so we are really asking our programs, we're doing a family involvement curriculum where if we take a young person into our program, we want their family to come to a certain number of classes that we offer. And those classes are intended to drive familial change in attitude about why you're always going to be better off of benefits and working and making a salary, about what's needed to lift a young person and a family out of poverty. This is what our timeline looks like. We start in August. We end in June. Again, we do 3 internships over the course of the year. There's a lot of other things involved, but you get the drift. Our program really looks kind of like this wagon wheel. The interns come in the morning. They go to a centralized classroom. They get an hour and a half of curriculum. It's all curriculum on employability skills. We're not teaching reading and writing, except as functional skills. We're talking about if you work in a hospital, why do you have to wash your hands? We're talking about why confidentiality is so important, why you have to open the door for patients rather than people opening the door for you. So our employability curriculum is based on the business where we're located. After that hour and a half, each intern goes out to a different department. We never send more than one to the same area. And then while they're out there for the bulk of the day, our staff, our instructor, our job coaches, our business liaison are kind of rotating and checking in because we want our business at all times to feel like we have their safety, that their safety is paramount. Internships, I think this is also one of those things that sets us apart. We only focus on marketable skills. We cannot continue to spend money teaching skills that no one needs. And quite frankly, businesses are not stupid. So when we started at Children's, I had a couple of my friends who called. They were department heads. And they said, Erin, we've got this huge mailing that needs to go out. Could we have an intern who would stuff envelopes for 10 weeks? Because we can't get a volunteer to do it. They want to hold babies. The staff don't want to do it. And the answer to that is no. We're not going to use a person with a disability to do something that is not going to benefit them or teach them a skill that's needed in society. That's a waste of their time, and we cannot continue to waste people's time. So unless we happen to live in a city where there's a huge business and they're going to use folks to mail, that's a different story. But if that business doesn't exist, don't waste time. People with disabilities are far too precious and far too capable to sit in rooms doing something because no one else wants to do it. It's wrong. So we teach marketable skills. We're really strict about that. So most of our folks get 4 to 5 hours a day or 910 hours over the course of the year, all on skill building. We're able to work on work and social skills. It's integrated. And once they learn a skill, we teach another skill. So this is not a program where we say, oh, for 10 weeks, we want you to do this one thing. And once you master it, well, then you're going to be helpful. Once they master it, we have to give them something else to learn. Because the goal is for them to leave this program with as many skills as they can possibly have. I apologize. I'm trying to talk loudly, plus I have a little bit of a sore throat, so I think I'm just a little bit raspy. This perfect example. I have permission to mention all these people's names, and so I will. They've all signed waivers, but this young woman, her name is Sarah. Sarah uses a large wheelchair. She has limited use of one arm. She has some speech difficulty. Her dream, coming out of high school, was to be a receptionist. She has absolutely no training in being a receptionist. She's not going to get a job just because she wants it. And so she came into our program. We knew she wanted to be a receptionist. Not everyone knows what they want to do, but she did. And so we built her year around teaching her receptionist jobs. So the place where we start always, and this is such common sense to me, we go to the business where we are and we ask to see the job description for a receptionist and for a secretary. And then we spend the year teaching those skills. So her first rotation, she was in our vice president's office. And she spent 10 weeks learning how to put a headset on with one hand and learning how her voice needed to sound when she answered the phone. How do you take a message? What do you write it on? What do you do with it once you take it? The first 20 phone calls she took, she was in the vice president's office. Who were her first 20 phone calls from? They're from us. We're not just going to say to the business, hey, we're here, we're going to start answering your phone. That's ludicrous. Her first 20 phone calls, or even more, until she had a certain level of proficiency, were from us. And then we're going to say to a receptionist down the hall, can Sarah begin to answer 1 out of every 10 phone calls? And when she does, we'll be here to make sure she does it correctly. Now, how many of you think in 10 weeks she was answering every phone call? She wasn't. She's a person with a disability. She needs lots of training. So her second internship, we put her in consumer lending, not because she was doing consumer lending, but because they have some clerical skills, and she focused on computer skills. How do you put an appointment in between two people in Outlook? What was she also doing? She's answering the phone, because she needs to practice that. Her third rotation, we put her with a receptionist out in the lobby. We taught her how to make a name badge, how to get someone to sign in, how to give them directions, much like the man downstairs that I signed in with this morning. Today, she has worked for probably 10 years at Fifth Third Bank, their corporate office in Cincinnati, as their front desk receptionist. And in fact, she doesn't do that job anymore because she recently was promoted to a secretary in the HR department at Fifth Third's corporate office. This young girl would never have worked as a receptionist coming out of high school. She had absolutely no skills. And businesses don't have the time and the energy to know how to train, to adequately train someone with a significant disability, nor do we have the lead time necessary. This makes it work. You know, the other thing we do, we focus on quality and productivity. And I get to be around the country a lot, and I see lots of disability programs. And as a businesswoman, I think this is sometimes where they miss the boat. You know, we go in, we talk about, we want you to hire our folks, but we don't talk to businesses about quality and productivity. It's absolutely necessary. Let me give you an example. This is a productivity example. If I've got a space, and I want that space, I want it tidied, I want it wiped down, I want it put in a certain order, and I have 2 young people with disabilities, and I ask them to do the job in an hour. And one person goes in, and at the end of the hour, he's only halfway through, but the half he did is really good. And then I have another young person who comes out after 10 minutes and says he's done, but he's done a really bad job. Which one of those is okay? Actually, neither one of them. Neither one of those is okay for competitive employment. It's about productivity. If you have a job, it's not okay to do 2% of something and expect to be paid or hired. So our program really focuses on getting people with significant disabilities to exactly the same productivity. Same thing with quality. And quality is a really hard concept. So we teach it, we try to make this abstract concept more concrete by talking about chocolate chip cookies. So we have our instructor burn a batch of chocolate chip cookies, and we have her make for him, have him make some that look really weird. And then we have him make some that look like a chocolate chip cookie. The truth of the matter is they're all chocolate chip cookies. They are not all good chocolate chip cookies. And so we refer over the entire year back to this chocolate chip cookie exercise. Yes, you may have done it. Yes, maybe you did what you were supposed to, but maybe it gets a score of 2 and not 1 because it wasn't really what we were looking for. Does that make sense to everybody? So what I want to talk to you about finally, I just want to tell a couple stories really about raising expectations. And some of these stories tell on me as a businesswoman as much as anything because we don't know what we don't know. We have to partner with you in order for us to learn how to appropriately hire and work with people with disabilities. That partnership is what's critical. So this was a young woman by the name of Annie Selbert. Annie has Down syndrome. Annie came to us 15 years ago. She doesn't read or write. And I used to think, well, how can a person with a disability work in a business as important as a hospital if they can't read and write? But what you guys have taught me and what I have learned is that that's a myth. It's not really necessary if I work with the right people. So I hired her, and she worked with me in the emergency department for 6 months. And she stocked all the equipment in 58 rooms. She was a stocking technician. She had the same exact productivity and quality as anybody else. She was a great employee. About 6 months into it, the head of our dental clinic came to see me and said, Erin, we have an open position that turns over a lot. It's a really critical job. We know you have this young woman with a disability. Do you think she'd be interested in a promotion? So even though she'd been a great employee with me, I was still new at this, and I said no. Now the tragic part of this is that I never even asked her, nor did I ask her family, because I felt as a person without a disability who was running this program that I must know more than she did. And it felt okay. I never really thought about it. In all fairness to me, the reason I said no was because I knew that Annie couldn't even find her locker in the locker room, and she couldn't open her combination lock. And so what I did is pretty normal for a business person. I judged her whole life on what she couldn't do instead of what she could do. So I thought about it overnight, and I decided, no one has ever failed for me. I failed lots of times, but always on my own behalf. And so our philosophy really has grown to be, we may not always be successful. People with disabilities may not always work in the job that we try, but it's up to them to fail for themselves. We're not going to do it for them. And so Annie now has worked at our hospital for 15 years full-time. She works in the dental clinic. She sterilizes every single dental instrument that goes into a mouth at our hospital. We have a 15-room dental clinic. The cases turn over every 30 minutes. She's not part-time. She's not the substitute. She's the only person who does this job. She's making nearly $20 an hour. She has her own tax-sheltered annuity. She takes hospital benefits. She's considering moving out and living independently in the community. And she's doing a crazy hard job. There's no way, though, she could have come out of high school and walked into this job. None whatsoever. Here's the cool part. She still can't use a lock. She still can't find her locker. But what people in the disability field have done is taught me as a businesswoman that there's lots of ways around that. So this is a laser lock. You point this laser here, you press it, the lock pops open. And so it doesn't matter if she can't use her lock. We did an accommodation. And if you walk into this dental clinic locker room today, you'll see about half a dozen of these. It's not because we have a half dozen people with disabilities. It's because it's easier. And what happens when people who are experts in the disability field work on a daily basis with business people is that we learn from each other. Same thing here. Her name is Gretchen. Gretchen has Down syndrome. Gretchen doesn't know how to count. And again, I used to think, well, how can you put stuff where it belongs if you can't count the number I need? Not that I'm a mean person, or not that I'm not willing to give people a chance. It's just I don't know how to make an accommodation. It's not my skill set. But what disability field folks taught me is that there's lots of ways to count. And so this young woman happens to use pictures of the items. So this is a picture of 20 baby nipples on one big sheet of paper. And so when she needs to put 20 in a bag, she puts a nipple on top of each picture. She folds it in half, dumps it into a plastic bag, and she always has how many? 20. Critical work for us, coming to work every day, filling high turnover jobs, none of whom count. But there's lots of ways to count. Businesses just don't know about it. So we have folks who use this counting board. I have no idea how to use that. That's not what's important. It's that she was taught how to use it. This young woman is legally blind. She wanted to work in our storeroom, and you can see in this picture She's not a strong reader. And what we did, we put books together that had pictures. To put something where it belongs, do you have to be able to read? No, you don't. What do you have to be able to do? Match. It's such a simple thing. Actually, it's quite difficult, but people with disabilities are very good at matching. You do not need to read. This is a great example of business. These are oximetry probes. They go on the end of a finger, and they measure the oxygen in blood, and they measure your pulse. And most hospitals use one for every patient. They cost us about $18 when we buy them, but they can be recycled twice, and they only cost us $6 the second time around. But we were throwing them out because it was time-consuming work. And the reason it's time-consuming is when we started doing this, only 40 of these could go back at one time in a package of 40, so you have to be able to count to 40. You have to wipe it down with a sterilizing agent, which means you have to hold it and wipe it down. You have to check the color of the tag and make sure it hasn't been recycled too many times, and you have to check and make sure the head's not broken. And we had a young man who wanted to do this job. He was our student. He had spina bifida, and he had two big things. Number one, he doesn't count to 40. He doesn't count. Number two, he has one arm that's much weaker than the other. He can't hold it and wipe it down. Now, in the past, as an employer, had you bought me Nick and say, hey, I think you got this job, here's Nick, I would have looked at you like you were a crazy person because I wouldn't have understood the possibility. Here's what was built for us. It's a standing Lazy Susan. It's made out of $9 of plywood. At the top, there's a disc. It's got 40 slots cut into it. So when he fills every slot, how many does he have every time? 40. He has 40. They're hanging, so he can pull his wheelchair up and use his one strong arm to wipe it down. The first year we hired Nick to do this job, he saved our hospital $1.1 million. And our return on investment, we spent $9 in plywood. We have people who are non-readers. We had a young woman who wanted to work and stock food in our kitchens, in our breastfeeding rooms, in our nurses' stations. And so all we did, we went through and we took pictures of everything, any place we had food. Chocolate chip cookie, mustard packet, Miracle Whip. All she needed were signs. She recently wanted a new position. She applied for a transfer and got it. We hired a person who can read. We asked if he wanted us to keep the labels up, and he said, yes, I do. Now, why did he want them? Because they're easier. Because 80% of people process pictures more quickly than we do words. So we did this to allow a person with a disability to work, but it's better for everybody. Another great example, we have another woman who is legally blind, working downstairs in our storeroom. When she came through as a student, we had hundreds of these bins, and all the bins have been labeled with these teeny little labels. She couldn't read that label, so the teachers and job coaches created these big labels, but they were really polite and they hung them underneath. And within 2 weeks, we noticed the staff in the department were covering up the small label with the big label. Why were they doing it? It's easier to read. If you've seen nothing else from my presentation, this is not rocket science. This is braiding funding. This is creating a sustainable program. This is about doing things that make sense and are good for everybody. Now, I do want to say, though, so if I'm the manager of materials management and you walk in off the street and I've never met you before and you bring with you a person who has a visual impairment and you stand there in front of me and you say, hey, I've got Cindy here and she wants this job, it's not that I don't want to work with people with disabilities, but if I don't know how and you're approaching me like that, they're like sirens going off inside my head. And I'm worried about, I don't know how to do this, what's it going to cost, how do I do it, what's the staff going to think. I'm thinking of all these problems. But if you work with me in a school program and you have a teacher and job coaches there who are teaching me, then it becomes not a big deal, but something I understand. So in this department, they went on to hire this young woman because it wasn't a big deal. We taught them how to work with someone with a visual impairment. Just a few more slides. This young woman has severe autism, and many businesses have someone who cleans windows in their businesses on a round-the-clock time. The problem was she had a really difficult time determining if a window was dirty or clean. How can you resolve that issue?
Right on the window.
You can make everyone dirty. So that's what we taught her to do. We gave her a marker. We let her choose what she wanted to write. She wanted to do 1, 2, 3, squiggly. We got quality control. She learned what she needed to do, and it got rid of some of that judgment call that had been a problem. Does that make sense? This young woman wanted to work with babies, really significant developmental and intellectual disability. We have lots and lots of incubators and isolates. This one has over 50 parts that need to come off, be sterilized and processed, put back on. She has to check for airline factors that let out heat and oxygen. She has to check the water level, the circuitry, the maintenance. This is how she learned. A project search year and nothing more than a bunch of pictures, and the support of a teacher and some job coaches who knew how to teach her best. This woman works in an operating room in a department called clinical sterilization. This is an operating room tray. It's got 151 instruments. I know it's a laparotomy tray because I took the picture, and it's got 151 instruments. It's just come out of a pressure washer. She's going to dump it out, and she's going to put those instruments back in that tray in the exact way that they'll be used by the surgeon, from first to last instrument. She knows if it's a left or right-handed tray. She knows if it's a male or female tray. She can do every tray in this department. The required productivity is 30 trays a day for all their staff. She has decided she wants to do the number of trays that match her age. So today, she's doing 35. So we have 58 people currently hired at Children's that we've hired as graduates. Many of them have been with us 8, 9, 10 years. Many of our folks are taking benefits offered by Children's. 8 of them have gone on to be married. Almost all of them have their own tax sheltered annuities and other businesses. It's changed their lives essentially. I just put a couple of outcomes up that I wanted to show you. We looked at all of our programs in California, and if you look at benefits in California across supported employment, about 62% of people with developmental disability were benefit eligible. In California, 100% of our graduates who went on to be employed were benefit eligible. This is my last slide. I'm really finished, and I totally appreciate your attention, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
So thank you, Erin. That was really quite fabulous. And the slide is actually the picture of a book, and you can buy her book on Amazon, and I do recommend it. I have a couple of copies because I like to give them to people as gifts, actually, because it really is, she's really come together with a great model here. Let me start off with, we have very little time, so I apologize for that for Q&A, but let me just ask you, right now you're serving 2,700 young adults this year. How many young adults in America, if you were to offer this program to everyone who meets your tough criteria of being, work ready or work inclined, and fits the profile for your program, how many people per year would that be if this was something that was national? Do you have any idea of the scope, the potential for this?
That's a really tough question, Jennifer. I've never been asked before. We do use a tough rubric, but we're not looking for perfect people. We grade our folks on a 15 criteria, and we scale them on 1 to 5. And we're looking for 3s, people who are evolving but still need a lot of work. And to our best guess, there are millions of those young people, 18 to 21, who would love to be trained to work. And there are lots of training programs. We're just one, but I think it literally is millions.
So we have time for a couple questions.
What other expenses are involved for an organization that you've got money going direct to some positions, a coordinator of all that? Where is that funding coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every program requires a teacher, and that teacher usually comes from the school, and that's just an equal cost. There are, depending on the number of students, there are usually 2 job coaches. Oftentimes, one of those job coaches will be a paraprofessional who comes from the school with some additional training, again at no cost. And then the last job coach is someone who comes from a CRP, a community rehab partner, and that is covered by Voc Rehab. And then there'll be a follow-along person once the person's employed, and that's covered by DD typically. But those are just the day-to-day operational costs. There are additional costs for sure. So the first big cost is that we don't make money, but we have very strict, we audit our programs. They have to meet certain outcomes. And each program is required to sign a license and to pay for technical assistance as a part of their sincerity in really following a model. And that license can be anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. It's a one-time cost, but that is a cost. The other big cost, I think, is that when you're in a startup year and you're getting a program up and running, you don't have your teacher yet during the planning, you don't have your job coach yet, and agencies and schools, there's going to have to be planning and meeting time. And over the summer, before a program starts, it usually takes 10 days of teacher time and job coach time that, quite frankly, cannot be billed against a young person because they're not yet in the program and can't be billed to a school. So typically our partners, especially school and community rehab provider, have to do at least 10 days where they can pay staff for program development. I guess our attitude about that is that it's lots of meetings, and businesses and community rehab providers and Voc Rehab are constantly working on, and that is part of the cost of program development. So it's about 10 days per group, not counting meetings. And then we do charge a yearly fee to each one of our programs, and that's $300 a year. And that allows us to hire a database manager who manages, because everyone is required to give their data back to the program. Those are our major costs. We don't require there to be a coordinator, because typically the teacher acts as the coordinator. A site may choose to have a coordinator. That's really their decision and not a required cost from us. Does that make sense?
Okay, so there is no funding, there's not margin coming in from anywhere else to pay for those sorts of costs. Those are all philanthropic or somewhere else.
It's kind of the cost of doing business. Anytime that you develop a new program, you assign staff to the development of that program. And so certainly there are programmatic time costs. And again, it's 10 hours per school usually over the summer and 10 hours per community rehab partner where the job coaches have to go into the business the summer before. Other than that, there aren't too many costs.
Other questions?
The students, when they're together, have you also seen them, in addition to learning great work skills, really great social skills? Do they form bonds with one another and with other people in their work environment? Do you see their integration expanding beyond the work site?
I think, to be totally honest, that's the thing that amazes actually parents, families, and teachers the most. It's that within a couple weeks, they are different people. And it's not a bad thing, but just because you have a disability doesn't mean you're stupid. And our young folks have been in school their whole life, often with the same group of teachers. And they know exactly how far they can push and what they can get away with. And so they're going to do that. And when you come into a business, that all ends. And they grow up very, very quickly. They begin to do, anecdotally, we hear they do chores at home. Their confidence goes up. We did a really small study looking at people on buses and how they were treated. and we looked at some folks who came to, how many times they'd been picked on or made fun of prior to Project Search versus how many times they were picked on or made fun of once they had a badge from the hospital. It was crazy difference. So yes, we haven't tracked, to be totally honest. We haven't done any kind of research on social change. We know it's major. It's also big for the employer, though.
Sure.
Employers, we're good people. We don't know how to train and employ people with disabilities. It's not what we learned. But if we partner with CRPs and disability specialists, it's the best of all partnerships. It's a fabulous relationship.
One last question, if anybody has one.
Can I ask real quick, Erin, really appreciate the presentation. I'm really glad that you touched on transportation because I think that's really an overlooked area for improving transition outcomes is access to get to a job or to get to a post-secondary educational opportunity. Can you expand upon the requirement that your program has on that? And you said it was during the summer, and so is this each individual in the program has to learn travel training themselves? Is it supported from the school system? How does that need to happen?
That's a great question, and thanks for what you said about it, because I think we really believe it is critical. If you don't teach a transportation and the school's over, there's no mechanism for you ever to learn. So we have to take advantage of that time. But it's really hard for parents. It's very, very scary, and I get that. That varies so much because of local policy. So in Cincinnati, for example, our Metro bus, they do travel training. There's a person with our bus company, and they will travel train anybody, and they do it the summer before. So our requirement is that our young people get in touch with Metro and do the travel training. Other cities aren't so fortunate, or maybe not even have public transportation. And if they do have public transportation, they may want to do it over the year, and we usually say the beginning of the year, and it might be with a job coach who's assigned to the program. And then the third is that if there's no transportation, we have a lot of rural programs. And if there's no transportation in a rural area, we don't really care what they use, but it's not going to be the school bus. We had a program in Amish country in Ohio, and I think the young woman rollerbladed, actually. We don't care. She's not going to come on the little white or yellow bus because that's going to stop. And she has to have a plan for her future. And so, again, we don't care if it's parents, aunts, uncles, a taxi, if you drive your own car, if you ride share, we don't care, but we're not going to do the school bus.
Last question.
Since we're all here, I'd just like to share our local resource. Here in DC, there's a nonprofit that actually Jamin discovered that we've been using this last year with Project Search called On the Move, and it's a free training for people with disabilities on how to use Metro bus, Metro rail, everything in like the DC area and into Maryland and Virginia as long as it's part of Metro. And it's a great program. They'll train them for them over the summer. And they'll actually write up a report. Some of them don't graduate from the training, and they'll let us know why they don't feel it's safe for them to travel independent and give them recommendations so we can really prepare them for the start of the program. So it's a really great local training program here in the city.
Thank you so much. So that's what I mean. Some cities have that, some don't. So it really varies by your community.
So on behalf of Respectability and all of us who are here, I want to thank Erin very, very much, not only for this terrific presentation, but the many years that she has spent developing this model, really shepherding this program, and really loving these young adults for whom she's providing opportunities this year, along with her team, for 2,700 young adults. This program is now in 44 states. We'd like to see it in more states, and we'd frankly like to see it greatly expanded in the states where it currently exists. We do see it as win-win for workforce development, for employers, for the individuals who want to have that opportunity to achieve the American dream, and of course for taxpayers in terms of saving dollars. As Erin pointed out, you can save $1 million per individual who is able to go when they're young into integrated, competitive employment. So this is really good for taxpayers as well. Erin, terrific work that your entire team has done in developing this model. Thank you for bringing it to us today. If anyone has any questions, I'd like to invite you to contact us at respectabilityusa.org or go straight to projectsearch.us. Thank you very much for joining us for this training, and let us know if we can be of help. Thank you, Erin.